When is the time? When do Americans get their freedom back? Can you put your microphone on, please?
Sorry. When we get the level of infection in this country low enough that it is not a really high threat.
What is low enough? Give me a number. What, I mean, we had 15 days to slow the spread, turned into 1 year of lost liberty. What metrics, what measures, what has to happen before Americans get their freedoms back?
My message, Congressman Jordan, is to get as many people vaccinated as quickly as we possibly can to get the level of infection in this country low that it is no longer a threat. That is when. And I believe when that happens, you will see.
What determines when?
I'm sorry.
What measure? I mean, are we just going to continue this forever, or when do we get to the point? What measure? What standard? What objective outcome do we have to reach before Americans get their liberty and freedoms back?
You know, you're indicating liberty and freedom. I look at it as a public health measure to prevent people from dying and going to the hospital.
You don't think Americans' liberties have been threatened the last year, Dr. Fauci? They've been assaulted. Their liberties have.
I don't look at this as a liberty thing, Congressman Jordan.
Well, that's
I look
obvious.
At this as a public health thing.
But
I disagree with you on that.
You think the Constitution is suspended during a virus, during a pandemic? It's certainly not.
This will end for sure when we get the level of infection very low. It is now at such a high level, there's a threat again of major surges.
Dr. Fauci, over the last year, Americans' First Amendment rights have been completely attacked. Your right to go to church, your right to assemble, your right to petition your government, freedom of the press, freedom of speech have all been assaulted. So I just want to know, when do Americans get their First Amendment liberties back?
You know, I don't think anything was censured because they felt they couldn't disagree with me. I think you're making this a personal thing, and it isn't.
It's not a personal thing.
No, you are. That is exactly what you're doing.
No, your recommendations carry a lot of weight, Dr. Fauci. We just had the chair of the Financial Services Committee said she loves you and you're the greatest thing in the world.
My recommendations are consistent.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, it's my
Now,
time.
could I answer the question, please? My recommendations are not a personal recommendation. It's based on the CDC guidance, which is
And I'm asking the question,
underscored.
what measures have to be attained before Americans get their First Amendment liberties back?
I just told you that.
No, you haven't given anything specific. You said, we hope when this tell me specifically.
Right now, we have about 60,000 infections a day, which is a very large risk for a surge. We're not talking about liberties. We're talking about a pandemic that has killed 560,000 Americans.
I get
That's
that,
what we're
Doc,
talking about.
and I don't disagree with that, and I understand how serious that is, but I also understand it's pretty serious when businesses have been shut down, people can't go to church, people can't assemble in their own homes with their friends, with their families.
Right now, we're at an unacceptably high level. On a daily basis, it's unacceptably high, regardless of who you are. What you're going to see as more and more people get vaccinated, and we get over 3 million people a day, you're going to see the level of infection come down, and gradually there will be more flexibility for doing the things that you're talking about.
Where does it get to? When it comes down, what number do we get our liberties back? Tell me the number.
I just did.
No, you didn't. You didn't give us a time. When do you think this is going? Are we going to be here 2 years from now wearing masks?
No,
Jim Jordan asked Dr. Fauci the same question.
Well, let me answer your ranting again. Let me
I'm not ranting.
Yes, you are.
No, here's how it works, Dr. Fauci.
Right.
I get to ask you the questions. You're the highest paid official in the United States government. You've given us your advice on baseball, on dating apps, on cruise ships. You told us 0 masks, 1 mask, 2 masks, now back to 1 mask. I'm just asking you, when is it going to end? You can say I'm ranting. I'm actually asking the question that the citizens I get the privilege of representing, and my name actually goes on a ballot. I don't think your name's ever been on a ballot. My name goes on a ballot. The citizens I represent want to know the answer to when they can get their liberties back. You can call that ranting. I actually call it standing up for the Constitution, which I take an oath to uphold, Dr. Fauci, every year, every term that I serve in this Congress representing the folks in the 4th District of Ohio. So it is not ranting. It is defending the First Amendment.
Badgering.
And we'd like an answer, or your best guess, since
Yeah.
you got an answer for everything else.
Here's Jim Jordan losing his mind and using his time with Dr. Fauci to do what else but grandstand loud enough to secure his slot on Fox News for the day. Now, there are two issues with Jim Jordan's temper tantrum. The first is that he doesn't actually want any answers to the question of when our lives can go back to normal. He wants to use his time to shriek about all of the conservative buzzwords he can throw out. And so he'll wail about the Constitution and church and censorship and liberty because it's not about getting an answer, it's about his performance. It's about the theatrics. It's about saying as many words as possible so that he gets his screen time in, because for Republicans, it's not about solving problems, it's about following the formula for success in the GOP, which is little more than acting like you're on a reality show. It worked for Trump, and the rest of them are falling over themselves to recreate it. The second issue is that he's looking for some definitive, quantifiable moment when the country will be fully reopened, but this is a virus. It is a constantly changing phenomenon. There can be flare-ups, there can be waves, there could be variants that all of a sudden render the vaccines completely useless. And then Republicans would point to Dr. Fauci and say, well, hold on, you told us that everything would be back to normal when X happened. So of course Dr. Fauci can't just unilaterally declare when the pandemic will be over, and Jim Jordan knows that Dr. Fauci doesn't have the ability to do that. The whole point is to ask an impossible question and then sanctimoniously grandstand as if Fauci is obstructing the answer. He can't predict the future. All he can do is explain, from a public health perspective, what to do to give us the best chance of beating it. And by the way, if Jim Jordan is so desperate for a date or time or quantifiable measure as to when the country will be reopened, that's on him too. That's on his party. If he himself would go out and encourage vaccinations and continued mask use and social distancing until we're finally in the clear, that green light that he's so desperately seeking will come sooner. So instead of looking to Dr. Fauci as if he's some all-powerful being, as if Fauci controls the virus, Jim Jordan might consider taking some responsibility and doing his part to ensure that our return to normalcy comes sooner rather than later. And beyond that, it's like Jim Jordan was just born this morning, because he clearly thinks that all of these restrictions being placed on Americans happened in a vacuum. As if the Democrats just woke up one day and said, hey, I know, let's enact restrictions just for the hell of it. Someone should quite simply ask Jim Jordan why these restrictions are in place, because clearly the guy has no idea that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, a pandemic that has already killed nearly 600,000 people. So Jim Jordan wants to lash out like a toddler because things aren't as convenient, but guess what? Of course they're not convenient. There is a deadly contagion spreading across the planet. So instead of whining that you don't get to live your life 100% as normal, maybe recognize that the world doesn't exist to serve you, tragedies happen, and sometimes our lives are going to be impacted. Consider too, if Jim Jordan is so worked up over his precious routine being altered even in the slightest, why didn't he push back against Trump and the rest of his party when they actually could have gotten this virus under control? You ever notice how it's the people who yell most loudly about not wanting their lives disrupted, who act in such a way that all but ensures their lives will be the most disrupted? Knowing how much Jim Jordan adores his quote-unquote freedoms, why not do everything in his power to prevent the spread of this virus so that we didn't have to take measures that were necessary to then keep people alive? Instead, the GOP, led by Trump, opted to politicize masks, they fomented protests against stay-at-home orders, they pushed schools and businesses and restaurants to reopen, they held campaign rallies. Their response was scientifically engineered to spread this virus as much as humanly possible. And then they run around with their hair on fire when suddenly we have to take drastic measures in response to the virus exploding throughout the country. It's like they spent the last 8 months dousing a burning building in gasoline, and now they can't figure out why we can't simply go back into the building like we used to. The fact is that everything the GOP does is not only reactionary, but they make it part of the same supposed tyrannical liberal government takeover that they're constantly wailing about. Liberals want to shut down your businesses and impose curfews and mandate your dress codes and close your churches. It's always the same hysterical claims where somehow they've decided that mandating simple masks during a global pandemic means that your freedom to dress yourself is being eliminated, or that restricting gatherings, again, during a global pandemic means that Christianity itself is under attack. Not everything is a conspiracy against conservatives. Sometimes people just want to be able to survive, which you'd think that even Jim Jordan might appreciate. But apparently 500,000 dead Americans is still not enough to do the trick. So Jim Jordan will continue to grandstand and pretend like he's some defender of liberty, but he's not. He's only out there to bolster his brand and be loud enough to get his 5 minutes of spotlight in a party that exists not to govern, but to perform. It's not substance, it's theatrics. And Jim Jordan's performance here is Exhibit A. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. And for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I discuss the week's top stories and interview major players in the world of politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.